Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Game Changers for Government Contractors. I am your host, Michael LeJeune, and we have Miss Angela Seymour here with us today. Angela, before we get started and talk about the SLED market and the differences and
Yeah.
things like that, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about who you are and what you do?
My background is in public procurement. I've got almost 20 years of public procurement background. I started out with a county here in South Carolina, and I worked there for just about 15 years. And then I went to the state of South Carolina and I worked there providing training in their government procurement program. I then went to the University of Massachusetts PTAC, which is now the Apex Accelerators, and worked there. And I've been with the University of South Carolina now for a little over a year now.
Nice, nice. And when we started talking about doing the podcast together, you proposed an interesting topic here. I don't think we talk about the SLED market a whole
I
lot,
agree.
and so that's something we like talking about here and there. Most of the stuff we do is federal, and to just tell everybody who, if you haven't listened to a podcast before, I'm a little biased. I really do like the federal market over
Right.
the SLED one. We're going to talk about some different things, but the SLED market's a really good one. And for those who don't
Absolutely.
know, SLED, state, local, and education. Those are all government funded sources that you can go after. So let's kick it off with,
Yeah.
I think one of the best questions here we can ask is, what do you feel like are the biggest differences between being a government contractor in the federal market and one that is primarily focused in the SLED market?
Well, I think it's experience. I think you're able to gain more contracts in the SLED market. There's not as much stress or requirements as there is in the federal market. And also the state and local market, you're local. You're there. You can show up in person. It's a lot easier to gain that face time and that exposure that way. The federal market, I mean, unless you show up at DOD's front door knocking, they're not going to really know you as much as they would. And also, too, just because of the exposure, I know when I was a procurement officer, it was easier for me to find contractors locally. And I tell my clients all the time, they can't do business with you if they don't know about you. And
Right.
it's easier to have that exposure in the local market.
Right. Yeah. And I think there's almost two different mindsets in businesses, one where you're trying to work national, one where you're trying to work local. And the two don't often mix or don't always mix
Hmm.
with companies. And I think if you have a national mindset, which a lot of companies do, I think the federal one's easier. But if you have a local one, I 100% think the SLED market is going to be easier for you,
Hmm.
assuming you are within the general vicinity of anything. I've got
Hmm.
clients in Oklahoma and Texas and other places. They're like, Mike, you could drive 100 miles in any direction. You're not going to see anything but maybe a gas station, right?
Right.
So,
Right.
so local to them is a little bit different than local to the rest of the world when
Right.
you think about it. But I think in general, spot on what you're saying there. You brought up an interesting point there about the restrictions. Do you think that because of things like CMMC, so cybersecurity
Hmm.
requirements, and some of the other requirements that we see the federal government starting to pile on, do you see a trend over the next few years where you have government contractors who were primarily focused on the federal market, who understand government and how it works,
Hmm.
migrating to the SLED market because they're like, look, I don't want to deal with this hassle. And
Right.
my state local agents, they don't have the same requirements, but I still understand government and I want those contracts. Do you see that impacting a migration to the SLED market?
Absolutely. I find that, as you have a smaller company that maybe has two, three people, maybe just one, a lot of times in the Apex Accelerator program, we see companies that just have one contractor. That's it. Or one employee, and they're the employee, so they might not want to have the hassle of the CMMC just to do business in DoD. Especially if they're doing something small like janitorial. What
Right.
they're not gonna. They're a business of one, maybe two or three. They don't want to put the investment in there. They don't have the time or the money to do it.
Yeah. No, 100%. Yeah. And There are a lot of the solopreneurs, the one person companies that you do see in this market period, and I do see them sort of struggle in the federal side. And
Hmm.
unless they are self performing on that work, that's where they have some trouble
Right.
in some of those cases. So, what do you see as, say, a key challenge for the smaller disadvantaged businesses? You've got the ones with all the different statuses where there's mandated programs on the federal side.
Hmm.
Again, I don't do as much on the SLED side. I do see people
Hmm.
going in and getting some of those different certifications, but how applicable are those? As well as, what do you see as some of the key challenges for those small companies like that?
Well, first of all, just knowledge. A lot of them think because they have a VOSB that it'll be automatically recognized in the state or local market, and that's just not the case. As I tell my clients, the federal government doesn't recognize state certifications, and the state doesn't recognize federal certifications. So I think just the biggest challenge they're facing is a lack of knowledge. They don't know what's available. And, not every city in South Carolina has a set aside. Not every county in South Carolina has a set aside. Lexington County, it's sharpen your pencil. You bring your best offer. We don't have a set aside. They don't even have local preference. But we call them across the river in Richland County, they do have a set aside. And they have local preference. So it's hard to get all that knowledge to figure out who has a set aside, who doesn't have a set aside.
Do you feel it's a challenge for someone in the market, whether they're the one person company or 10 people or however size? Do you feel like it's a challenge that, like, the procurement sites are decentralized in there, where,
Hmm.
like, so, like, let's say I'm on the border, like where we live, I am 45 minutes from North Carolina. I'm
Right.
roughly an hour from South Carolina. I'm roughly
Hmm.
45 minutes from Kentucky. I'm 20 minutes from Virginia.
You're
You know,
everywhere.
yeah, we're in the eastern side of Tennessee, and I can probably touch 5, 6 different states within
Hmm.
an hour and a half. And even like if I'm going like towards Orlando or whatever, like I'll
Right.
cross North Carolina, South Carolina. I'll even cut through Georgia for a little bit, then,
Right.
then into Florida. So it's one of those things where I'm in an area where, like, man, I should work in all those states, but there's a
Hmm.
different procurement site for every single one of those, and a different set of rules and a different set of. How do
Absolutely.
you address that with somebody who is, let's say they're in South Carolina in your backyard? How do you help them navigate how different each of the states work?
Well, there's a couple of different resources that we use. Obviously, being in South Carolina, we direct them and walk them through the state sites. Our Apex Accelerator program has a map that you could click on, and it'll show you all the counties. I'd say about 60% of the cities, and probably about the same for the school districts as well too. As far as national goes, I show them NASPO, which NASPO has a state map that I provide to my clients as well too, and then USA Bids. USA Bids has some of the local. But if they really wanted to dive deep down, they're going to have to go and Google every town and find out what every town is using. The biggest challenge that I see with that is not all of them are having e-procurement boards. There's
Hmm.
actually several of them that are still posting it on paper in their lobby, or maybe they're just advertising. South Carolina has a South Carolina business opportunities. So if it's being advertised, it might go through there, and then you have to contact so and so at this procurement office, or in the case of construction, you would have to contact so and so at the architect, that's the architect or the engineer for the project. So I feel like that's a huge, first of all, it's a huge thing that does take up your time, and then you're waiting on bid documents. Or, there's there's a lot of larger school districts. The one that I'm in right now is a larger school district that I was surprised that is still doing paper. They are not doing e-procurement.
Hmm.
So that's frustrating to a lot of contractors as well, too.
Yeah, absolutely. I was talking to one of the bid matching companies out there. Just, it was like 2 or 3 years ago. We were having this conversation where they were talking about how they pull data, and I said, "So how do you pull the data from
Hmm.
all the SLED markets and stuff like that?" And they laughed and they said, "Well, a lot of it's digital. There's APIs
Correct.
on the back end. We can
Mhm.
pull that data, but there are places that we have to
Mhm.
call and
Yep.
get it over the phone. They won't send it any other way. There's
Yep.
some that'll email it. And he said, believe it or not, there's some people that'll put it on a CD and mail it to us once a month.
Wow.
And I just
Yeah.
thought, you've got to be kidding me. We're talking, I
Mhm.
think the conversation was in like 2022, 2023. And I'm like, you would think that everybody's posting it somewhere, even if they're using another city or the
Mhm.
state's website, they'd post it somewhere somehow. But to be just
Right.
posting it, thumbtacking it to a board is pretty wild. I really appreciate you sharing all those websites with us, because those are things that if people are on, trying to pursue the sled market,
Mhm.
they're not going to notice search for like NASPO, or they're not
Right.
going to notice search. Oh, the Apex has, this level of detail in all of the counties and things like that. So it's
Mhm.
really good, because I do think you're in a similar situation that a lot of us are, where people just go, I'm going to do this on my own. They just pass over the
Right.
Apex. They just pass over a consulting company and go, we'll just figure it out. We'll just Google it.
Right.
But they don't necessarily know what to Google even. And so
Right.
sharing some of those are really helpful. What do you see as like the difference for people when they are trying to position and sell in this market? So like in the Fed market, one of the strategies is always, well, let's find out who buys what you sell. let's
Mhm.
let's run that data.
Sure.
Once we run that data and we find your contracting officers and PMs and stuff, you start to reach out about capability briefs and things like that.
Right.
Maybe you're going to go to some national conferences. What's the approach in the sled market, and how does it vary from that?
So in the SLED market, the approach is going directly to whoever the end user would be. So if it was janitorial, I would, advise them first reach out to the procurement officer, see if you can get the building services manager on the phone and reaching out directly to them. If it's local and you can drive there, just drive to the building, walk in the building, introduce yourself and see what contracts are currently available. Now there is some uh, entities that are using like a public contracts, like they post their contracts. So Lexington County, South Carolina, they post their contracts, so you can go out and see what the contracting, what the prices are, what are they asking for. But you're not necessarily going to know, how do I find this person. I have a client that I worked with yesterday. She is in Title VI. And what I tell my clients is, don't get that pigeonhole effect. Don't look straight down. Look off to the side. And I told her, I said, a lot of community development programs use Title VI. So, and she was offering legal services for Title VI programs. And I said, you should probably reach out to that agency and talk to their community development manager and somebody that's over the grants program to help with the Title VI. So, that's just one of the ways that you can reach out, just making sure that you know who the end user is, whether it's calling up the contracting officer or the procurement officer or the procurement manager. Uh, Even the girl at the front desk might be able to tell you who it is as well, too.
Yeah. And yeah, that is quite different. In the federal side of it, you're a lot of times not going to get to know who that person is until you've won
Mm-hmm.
a contract.
Exactly.
That's often the way it is, or unless you're able to do a little bit of sleuthing and determine that, oh, based on LinkedIn and this person's profile,
Mm-hmm.
oh, they're the project manager or program
Right.
manager or whatever for this program. But sometimes you don't even
Mm-hmm.
have the program name or any of that type of
Right.
stuff, because you're dealing with procurement folks a lot of time.
Mm-hmm.
What do you recommend on like the events side of things? Like we always have our big events, whether it's vets or
Mm-hmm.
SAME or National 8A, Hub Zone
Sure.
Conference. There's so many big conferences out there
Mm-hmm.
that are national. What about on the local level? What are you typically recommending they do on that side, or is that even part of the strategy?
It depends on the location. Unfortunately, much of procurement is the answer is going to be it depends. South Carolina, they have the South. It's called SCAGPO, South Carolina Agency of Government Purchasing Officers, and they have a reverse vendor fair where they invite counties to have a table, and the vendors come in and talk to the people that are in front of them. Skagpo also has like an annual retreat in Myrtle Beach every year. So that would be another way. If you find out if there's an agency like that within your state, reach out to them, find out what kind of events they are having. And another one that I tell my clients, and if it's local, like NIGP is going to be in Charlotte this year. So that might be an opportunity where you can go in and sponsor a table and have some buyers walk by you.
So for those that have never heard of NIGP, what is that conference?
That is a national conference for buyers, for people that belong to NIGP. It's a National Institute of Government Purchasers. So the NIGP program they have a conference every year. A couple of years ago, it was in Boston. Like I said, this year it's in Charlotte. So they can go and like I said, sponsor a table. Same thing with SCAGPO or a local conference. Go and sponsor a table. Do you know how many people? There's a lot of buyers that go by your desk, and NIGP is the national conference. So while it might be in Charlotte, somebody from California might be able to walk by your table and use your services.
Yeah, that's a really good point there. So, what would your advice be if I am, let's say I'm in South Carolina and I'm getting my business started and I'm like, I want to focus on the state and local. I don't necessarily want to work on the Fed. And then they hear about something in North Carolina or they hear about something in
Mm-hmm.
California from something like this. What's your advice to that person that's getting started in one state on how to maybe do business in other states?
Well, first, I'm going to tell them to make sure they're established because they don't want to bite off more than they can chew. They don't want to be establishing a business in South Carolina and then try to get a contract in North Carolina or Virginia or Georgia, and they can't. They can't handle the amount of work that's being presented in front of them. The worst, a death sentence to a company is going to be termination. Is termination for cause. And just like it is in the federal government, it's
Yep.
a termination for cause. So, and let's face it, all these guys talk to each other, whether it's a
Yep.
county talking to another county, or, a state talking to another state. They talk to each other. So they're going to find out. So I would advise them before they start looking national, unless it's something they can provide national. Maybe it's cybersecurity. Well, that's a national market. They can, work around the country. But if you have something that is not necessarily in demand, I would say get your niche in South Carolina before you start moving to other
Mhm.
states.
Yeah, really good advice. Well, uh, do you see a massive difference in the proposal process and requirements between Fed and SLED?
I do. It's more, the Fed is a lot more strenuous, like it is with most things. It's a lot more complex. With the state and some local, that it's not as complex of a process. Sometimes that, with the proposal for building a shed in the federal, it might be 20 pages,
Yeah,
where in the state, it might be 3 pages.
yeah,
So
yeah. Or do you see less sections around past performance and that sort of thing where they're not saying, hey, you've got to have three examples all with the agency and that sort of stuff?
I do. I do. Usually they say, if they're requiring experience similar in size and, some semblance, it could be private experience, it could be government
They don't really
experience.
care. Yeah, as
No,
much.
they don't really care as long as they can do the work.
Yeah, that's the main thing.
I used to see a lot of my favorite when I was going to be a procurement officer was a dark horse. Somebody that's coming out of a completely different section and they come in and they just slam it and they end up getting that contract. They've never had any exposure to government or that particular government, and they come in and they win that contract. It's unbelievable. And it's a great
That's
thing to see.
awesome.
It's very refreshing because it shows that you can have other opportunities to other folks.
Yeah. Um, as they're looking through that, one of the questions I have is around the product side of things. So we know in the federal side, Buy America Act and all those
Hmm.
things that are in there that can make some of the product delivery, a little more interesting. There's
Sure.
also stuff like so when you have your work share requirements for, let's say, your woman owned things like that,
Hmm.
are they going to see those same requirements on the state side for Made in America, for work share, different things like that that are restrictive on the federal
Hmm.
side?
No, not necessarily. It depends on where the funding's coming from. If the funding's coming down through the federal government, then yes, they probably have some sort of set aside or requirement. But if the funding's coming directly from the state, um, I, unless there's a product or I'm thinking equipment, if there's an equipment that there's something that they need directly for it, I've seen equipment for a hydrostatic transmission versus a normal transmission on a front end loader. So there might be a reason that they, go that direction for comfort or convenience, but I don't really see anything that's that necessarily restrictive.
Right, right.
Now, each agency or each state may also have a local state preference too. South Carolina has one where they're evaluating the bid at a lower cost, but you charge the full price against your competitor who's out of state as well too.
Yeah. And do the hub zone preferences still apply over there on the state side? I know.
Not necessarily.
I was thinking they probably don't. Um, Another question for you is, so as I'm looking at this and I see there's less requirements, it's less stringent, less work. I mean, it does come across very, very appealing. Are there any downsides in your mind of being focused on the SLED market and ignoring the Fed market?
Not at all. Not at all. I think if anything,
It's a
there's an
great answer.
upside that there's, yeah, not at all. I think there's an upside. I
Yeah.
think there's going to be more opportunities.
Yeah.
I tell my clients when they said, I want to go into the Fed market, I'm like, well, you got no experience. And
Yeah.
with the government, experience begets experience. So
Right.
you have a better chance of breaking in at the local market.
Yeah. And that would logically seem like you go get your experience in the SLED market and then you make the leap to the Fed market.
Hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's kind of a logical jump. Are there any other websites that you would recommend for people? Because like when you get into the Fed side, okay, you got to go get registered in SAM. Once you're registered in
Hmm.
SAM, you need to go get your SBA profile and you need to update your DSBS and some things like that. And then if you're a product person, you're going to go get a DIBS account.
Hmm.
And that's the majority of the websites you're going to need initially. Are there some sites like that that you would recommend on the state side?
I would say initially just making sure that you register with your state.
Hmm.
If you find an opportunity that you happen to see, I tell my clients if you land on a page, whether it's state or local, that has a registration, get registered. If you happen to land on that page, because you don't want to wait till last minute to get
Right.
registered. So, but outside of that, unless there's something, the only other thing that I can advise is contacting your local Apex program to see if there's bid matching services and getting those bid matching services for that centralized send out for bids. But again, if you land on a page and it's got e-procurement, make sure that you are getting down there and registering for that e-procurement page. One of the things that I tell my clients is don't wait till last minute to submit a bid because the procurement officer may not be at their desk at 10 minutes to 3. They might
Right.
be in some place completely different. So,
Right, right, and read the instructions because I would assume some of the ones
mhm.
that are doing the paper bids may require you to physically drop it off or put it in the mail
Sure.
or whatever it may be. I mean, I've heard horror stories of people who did not get it in time because it had to physically arrive at that
Right.
office by a certain day time and they
Sure.
missed that because of a post office snafu or something
Right.
else going on. So yeah. Good
I
advice.
think that's no, no, I'm sorry. Another thing is, you started going down that rabbit hole and making sure that it arrives. Make sure you get your bid out with enough time to make sure that it does arrive. So if in honestly, the procurement officer is not going to make sure that FedEx gets your bid there on time or
Right.
USPS is getting your bid there on time. You have to make sure that you get your bid there on time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have seen too many people rely on that and be like, well, can I sue FedEx because they got it there late? Well, they didn't realize it was going to fall in a crack in the truck. I mean, I worked at FedEx
Mm-hmm.
once, and every now and then you'd be cleaning out a truck and you're like, hey, there's this package in here that was supposed to arrive 3 days ago. And no
Right.
one knew where it was because it was so small. It got wedged in
Mm-hmm.
something and there was some
Mm-hmm.
sort of issue. And there's nothing anybody can do,
Right.
right?
Right.
It's on you to take enough time to make sure that it arrives when it's supposed to.
Sure.
Any final thoughts or even some goals that you would recommend for folks that are just entering the sled market?
I would say first find your niche. Make sure that you're finding your niche in that market. There's a lot of controversy surrounding that middleman strategy, and that is a harder spot to get into that middleman strategy. While there's a lot less requirements, it's a harder thing to get into because with the sled market, you're going to be more in contact with the end user, and the end user is going to know that you've bought $65,000 worth of pants and you have no idea where they are or what they're doing. So making sure that you find your niche, applying that niche, getting out and registering for those sites. And, last but not least, definitely get in touch with your Apex Accelerator.
Yeah.
They can get out there and show you that government marketplace.
Yeah. And I always tell people, use every resource available because some people will
Mm-hmm.
say, well, I want to use you versus this or you versus that. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
why not do both? Why
Yeah,
not use everybody? Because
sure.
everybody's going to have a little bit different expertise, and two is better than one. So, or three is
Absolutely.
better than two, right? So use everybody
Absolutely.
you can. You need all the help
Right.
you can get. So, not that I necessarily want to close on this topic, but because you brought it up, and it's a hot button for me right now, I do
Sure.
want to go back to that middleman strategy there.
Absolutely.
Talk about the do's and the don'ts for folks because there are, in my opinion, way too many people on YouTube, TikTok, you name it,
Mm-hmm. You're absolutely.
broadcasting the middleman as the way to go. Live at
Mm-hmm.
home, work in your underwear, make millions of dollars by literally
Right.
doing nothing,
Right.
right? Which
Making a
on
phone
the
call.
yeah, on the surface it sounds so stupid. But
Mm-hmm.
I believe, this is my belief, I believe that people are so desperate for change, so desperate to dig out of the hole they're in, pay off debt,
Mm-hmm.
get away from their job, that they see it and go, okay, maybe. And, well, let
Right.
me buy their course. It's only $300. It's only $500.
Right.
And then what I have been receiving on the back end is calls from people saying, I bought this course. It was $300. It was $500.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody called me, you won't believe this, a $12,000 course on how to be the middleman. And
Oh.
he was like, Mike, this is crazy. About all I did was get registered in SAM, and they were telling me to just start
Mm-hmm.
bidding. That's about the value I
Yep.
got. And then I've had people call me up, half a dozen people in the last month that said, hey, I'm doing this middleman thing. I just won this contract for $65,000. I said,
Right.
great. What's the problem? And they're like, I don't have any money. I'm broke.
Right.
Like
Yep.
I'm literally, I don't even have a credit card. And the manufacturer is wanting $65,000 because I don't have any credit or I've got a negative credit
Mm-hmm.
score and I can't deliver. What do I do? And
Yep.
I'm like, well, you dug yourself a pretty deep hole.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't on, it was because you were following the advice. So that's my little 2 cents on that. What is your advice to people that are hearing about the middleman? I know there's a small window of where you can do it, in my opinion, but I'm curious about your opinion on that one.
Honestly, I tell my clients there's a lot of risk. I can't tell you not to do it, but what I can tell you is there's a lot of risk. You're going to be held on the line. So if first of all, they don't receive it and you get billed for it, you're still on the line for $65,000. If they don't receive it, if the payment doesn't come from the entity, so maybe there's something that held up your invoice. Maybe another COVID happened and now it's 120 days before you get paid. Well, now you still have to pay that the person that you got it from originally. That's $65,000, maybe more if they put a penalty on it.
Yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah.
it's a huge risk for them.
There just seems like there's so much risk. And do you see, going back to kind of the Fed market, we don't see as much of this in the SLED market where there is the 51% of the work and all of those different issues.
Hmm.
I mean, you're just not going to see that part, but it's the risk, in my opinion, of like, I don't know how to deliver pants. I don't know
Hmm.
how to deliver. One of mine was, it was about a $60,000 contract for toilet paper. And the guy's like, I don't know where to find it. I don't know how to buy
Right,
it.
right.
And he couldn't, cause he thought he could just
Hmm.
get it on Sam's Club's website.
Right.
And he realized, have you ever tried to put a $60,000 order for toilet paper on the Sam's Club website? It just implodes, right?
Right,
It
right.
doesn't work that way. And so, yeah, it's just really interesting. So I'm glad you said that about the middleman and brought that up, because I want people to keep hearing from other reliable sources. Don't do this. It's not the best way to start the business. So I tell people, if you want a side hustle that you can work from home in your underwear with, be an Amazon affiliate, be an
Hmm.
affiliate for one of the major brands out there like
Yeah.
Cabela's or something like that. There's so many brands you can be an affiliate for, and you don't have any of the hassle. You don't have any of the other manufacturing issues that you're going to deal with.
Hmm.
All you've got to do is make some videos and get paid through your affiliate link. That's it. So
Right,
do that instead.
right.
So that's my thing. So
You have a
so
better shot of getting it through YouTube or getting YouTube views than you are to get it
yeah,
through the federal government. And like I said, I
absolutely.
don't necessarily tell them not to do it. I can't tell you not to do it. What I can tell you is there's a lot of risk with it.
Yeah. No, great point. Great point. I really appreciate the whole discussion here. Thank you for coming on,
Thank you.
talking about the sled market, kind of opening some eyes and pointing them to some really good resources with a lot of the websites. I think it's been really helpful. Thank you.
I appreciate you having me on. And if you ever need me again, just give me a call.
Thank you.